Well, good evening. I'm glad you came. My name is Pastor Randy Powell. I'm, as most of you know, the pastor of this church, First Baptist of Franklin, and my wife and I had the privilege of going to Israel this past May. We spent 9 days, 7 days on the ground in Israel. I'm going to be sharing what we saw, the places we visited, and of course this is but a taste. There are always more things to see and more places to go. You can't possibly get to all of them, but that's where we're going to go in these three parts. We're going to start as we did in the north, and then next week we will be in Jerusalem, and then the following week down by the Dead Sea, depending on how well we keep our pace. So let's get ourselves focused on where we are talking about by first looking at where in the world where Israel is. I think you know where Israel is, where the Holy Land, where Palestine, Judea, right? We've got a lot of names, is. So it's right in the middle of this map, thankfully, correct? So we are closer to the equator than we are here in most of the United States, which means warmer. And as you can see from this map, which reflects vegetation, we are right in the middle of a very arid area. You've got the Sahara Desert to the west, you've got the deserts of Saudi Arabia to the southeast, you've got the deserts in Iraq to the east. This is not a climate or a temperature that is like it is here. It's threatening to snow here. That's only going to happen in this in the Holy Land, in the highest elevations. It's not the normal way of things. Let's zoom in a little bit. Actually, let's do this one more time. Notice to the southeast we have the Indian Ocean. To the west we have the Mediterranean Sea. All right, we are at a crossroads of human history, of travel, of trade, of the flow of ideas, in a very literal sense, coming through this land. And as you look in at the regional view, you start to see that. If you are in Egypt, the natural route for anything, for trade, for conquest, for ideas by land, is north through the Sinai, along through Palestine, and then up either into modern-day Turkey or modern-day Babylon. The Fertile Crescent starts over by Baghdad, by modern-day Baghdad, goes up and around and then down and ends in Israel. And so this is a natural route for anyone from Egypt going north, from anyone from Asia Minor going south, from anyone from Babylon, from Persia going west. So we have a natural flow because of the geography. We've got a vast desert. I'm going to try to avoid turning around so that anyone over there is not looking at the back of my head. We have a vast desert to the east. So this is the natural route by land, which means that when we start talking about the history of this land and its people, we are talking about the history of empires. These are chronological, starting with Egypt in the top left. The Egyptians, of course, are a part of the story continuously because they're right there. And when the Egyptians were strong, when the Pharaoh, when their empire was strong, they would expand north and they would conquer this land. And then on the top right, we've got the Assyrians, and that would be off to the east. The Assyrians later replaced by the Babylonians. The Assyrians are the ones that conquered northern Israel in the Old Testament. All right, they threatened Jerusalem under Sennacherib, but they failed to capture it one of many times. The bottom right is Babylon. Again, when Babylon expands, they're contesting with Egypt, and so they're going through here. King Josiah dies because he sides in one of the fights between the Babylonians and the Egyptians and goes to war on behalf of his ally and is killed in battle. And then, of course, Alexander the Great is the bottom left, and he conquers the whole region as well. But we see throughout this history, throughout the history that the Bible relates to us, and this story continues into modern times, the idea that this is a thoroughfare for new ideas, for the migrations of peoples, for the invasions of armies. And when we get to Megiddo, which we'll get to tonight, that story will really come into focus. What about the modern Middle East? How do we get to the modern Middle East? Where does that story develop? Well, if you go back a couple of centuries, you have the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire is basically the empire that more or less consolidated the Muslim lands for the better part of the time leading into the modern era. And by doing so, they had control of Judea, of Palestine, of Israel. All right, and when that empire started to crumble, and it took a long time, remember they were siding with the Germans and the Austro-Hungarians in World War I, that brought the British and the French and the Russians into the story, and so you start having colonial powers, and that's the bottom map, staking claims to this land. And so we get the French, we get the English in particular putting themselves into the story because of that colonial ambition when the Ottoman Empire started to fall apart. Israel, as we recognize it today on modern maps, comes from 1947. The United Nations partition, November 29th, 1947. This happens for a number of reasons, which is a big story all by itself. In brief, it's because of two primary factors. Zionism began in the 19th century. That was the idea that, in particular, European Jews should move back to Israel, back to the promised land. And so that trickle of people started coming back, whether they were from Russia or from Germany or from France, and buying land, settling in Israel. And so you have a growth in the population of Jewish individuals in this land. And then, of course, you have World War II and the Holocaust. And collectively, the world, and the UN is expressing that, realized the magnitude of the failure on the part of everyone else to show compassion and protect the Jews from the Nazis. And so you have a sympathy that says, now is the time. And so those things combined, and you have these boundaries. The teal, I guess, would be the boundaries of Israel according to the UN partition. The orange would be the boundaries of the Palestinian state. Now that looks somewhat similar to what we have today, but not quite the same, because of course the day that this state was proclaimed, war broke out and proceeded into 1948, which is what we end up with here. On the left-hand side, we see the boundaries of the UN partition plan. The middle is what we end up with after the war ends in 1948. It was an Israeli victory, not a complete victory, but a significant victory. And so you can see that the orange, which now has become dark green, and that's a little bit confusing, but you can see that some of that land, especially in Galilee in the north, and between Jerusalem and Gaza, that a good portion of that land was now under Israeli control. Once the 1967 war comes into the play, then you have Israel taking over Sinai and the Golan Heights, which leads us to where we are now and what has, of course, been all over the news in recent weeks, and that is Gaza and the West Bank. These are the boundaries and the makeup of this territory today. So on the left, we have Gaza. You can see the urbanization of this strip of land. There are millions of people living in this tiny strip of land. It's mostly a city, which means that the fighting that's been happening has been urban warfare, which is horrific no matter how it's conducted. And so it's been quite gruesome. And that is, of course, what is continuing and going on. You also see on the map refugee camps, but these refugee camps have been here since the 1940s, or if they're from 1967, that's a long time. They're not tent camps anymore like you might imagine. They're cities of their own right. However, the people here are, for want of a better explanation, basically without options. This is a very young land. Most of the people there, the average age is much younger than it is in the West. There are few jobs. There are very few places that they can go. Most don't have the right or the ability to emigrate anywhere. And so it is what it has been for many years, a powder keg. The West Bank is a little bit of a different story. In the West Bank, we have a much larger area. Now, it's still not a huge area because the entire nation of Israel is about the size of New Jersey, all right? So it's not big necessarily, but the West Bank is significantly bigger. The Palestinians living there much more spread out in towns and villages. But you see the way in the last couple of decades they have been segregated into small settlements, all right? Certainly not here to argue the pros and cons of Israeli policy or who's done wrong and whose fault is this and that. I will simply say at this point, and this is what I said when the war broke out, from this moment on, there are only bad choices. The only question is, are we going to make bad choices or worse choices? But the choices for the Palestinians are bad, the choices for Israel are bad, the choices for America are bad. Everybody has bad choices at this point. You can see, however, that when they talk about violence in the West Bank, when they talk about settlers and that interaction, you can see where that would happen. Because the settlements are all of that, I guess that's a green color, all of those green dots everywhere, and they're all interspersed around. So if you move through the West Bank, you're going from areas controlled by Israeli settlers to areas controlled by the Palestinians, and back and forth and back and forth. It's very dispersed. It's a very odd situation that you do not normally see in human history. So that is the situation as we have it now. The very next slide is going to be our trip, but I thought we needed some perspective before we got into it. And so this is an official map today. And of course, when you start talking about geopolitical issues that are very sensitive and wars have been fought over, just putting a map on the screen is going to likely make somebody mad. Right? Is that green labeled the West Bank? Is it labeled occupied territories? How is it labeled? Because that's going to make someone upset. All right? This is just a decent map, and I picked it. It's not a political statement in that respect, but it's very dangerous to draw maps. I actually just started, a book came that I ordered about Jerusalem, came today. I haven't even had a chance to read it yet, but the author's introduction is, you have to be careful when you write a book about Jerusalem because every word might make someone upset. What do you call this building? Whose name for it do you use? You're fraught with danger there. So this is a challenge, of course, to talk about this land in the modern sense. But also when we're talking about different eras in history, the way that it's described can lead to people being upset as well. Any questions about the geography, the culture, the overall geopolitical situation before we dig in and we start looking at individual places? Yes?
You said Jerusalem, maybe I misheard.
Yep.
You said Jerusalem is about the size of
No, all of Israel is the size of New Jersey. Jerusalem we'll get to next week. It's 500,000 people. So it's smaller than Pittsburgh, about the size that Detroit is today. I mean, it's good size, but it's not Paris or Chicago or something, 5, 6, 10 million kind of city. It's not nearly that big. So let us continue then, and we'll see what we see. Well, if you're going to go to Israel, the first thing is, how do I get there from here? And as we discovered, and this is myself, of course, you recognize the guy that's way close to the camera. The person behind me is my wife, Nicole, with whom I've shared marriage for 22 and a half years, and time is ticking on us like that. That is us going up the elevator at the airport, at Ben Gurion Airport in Tel Aviv, after an overnight flight. Because that is really the only way to get there from here, is to take that long of a flight. Maybe you'll have a stop in Europe, as some people on our tour went from New Jersey to I think theirs was in Frankfurt, and then to Tel Aviv. We had the direct flight. It's going to be somewhere in the 10, 11 hour range, depending on, of course, the Gulf Stream and all of that. It's a long flight. And for us, that meant, I think we left at 11:30. We arrived, because of the time zone change, at like 4 local time. And I slept somewhere. I slept from 4 a.m. to like 6:30 a.m. That's when I was able to sleep, of course, it was a decent plane with some good size to it, but still, right? I'm 6'1". It's a little bit more difficult. And so you get there and you're saying, okay, what time is it? My watch knows. My watch is updated by the satellite. It knows what time it is. But of course, you have time zone changes. And when we got to the airport, went through security. Security is, of course, very tight at the airport. The main airport is there in Tel Aviv in Israel, as it was in New Jersey. Just to get on a flight to Israel, you had to go through a second airport screening within the airport, which is the first time I've ever done that, which was kind of weird. You're saying, you guys don't trust the TSA? And they're saying, no, we don't. We've had enough hijackings, enough bombings that we don't trust anybody, so we're going to do it again. And so we went through that. We get there, and we get on a bus, and we head up to Galilee. And we're going to spend most of our time today, depending on how far we get, in Galilee, in the north. And of course, much of the Gospels takes place in Galilee. What I wanted you to see from this map is this relief map is the topography. Notice the brown, the hilly country, right? And we've got some valleys interspersed there. We've got the Jordan River Valley right down the middle, and we will see plenty of evidence of that valley. We have another valley heading off from Bet Shean, and that's one of the places we visited, northwest, and that is the Valley of Jezreel. We'll talk about that one. The Bible talks about that valley. Many of the places that are mentioned in the New Testament, like Capernaum and Nazareth and Magdala and Cana, are on our agenda tonight, and you can see them there on the map. That's not a very big area. Okay? And you're saying to yourself, well, that's not much of a journey if Jesus went from Nazareth to Capernaum. I mean, come on, it's that far away. What's the big deal? Now, he's doing it on foot, right? Give him a little bit of credit there. We were doing it in the back of a bus. It's not quite as big a deal. So we are in the north. We are around the Sea of Galilee, and so let's focus in on the Sea of Galilee. You can see a topographical map. The Sea of Galilee is in a bowl. All right? When you are on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, you can't see very far because the hills rise up. It's like being at the bottom of 15th Street Hill, right here in Franklin, except for that in every direction, there's that much of a hill around you. All right, other than, of course, the lake itself. And so the weather, you can't see very far. In ancient times, storms would come up quickly because you can't see very far. You can't see what's coming. So it's 700 feet below sea level. This is the lowest freshwater body of water in the world. All right, so 700 feet below sea level, 13 miles long by 8 miles wide. Now that's a sizable lake. I happen to grow up here, and this is because I'm a Michiganian. It means I use my hand to show where I grew up. And this was all water. Lake Michigan, Lake Huron, Lake Superior. Those are big lakes. And so when we were at the Sea of Galilee, I'm like, yeah, it's a good lake. It's not that big. There are other lakes, lots of lakes in America. But again, there are lots of lakes around here that are bigger than this, because there's a lot more water around here than in the Middle East. So a lake this size in the Middle East is a big deal. The primary water source for the Sea of Galilee is the Jordan River. The Jordan River flows in on the northeast corner, and it flows out on the southern corner. So in essence, the Sea of Galilee is just a collection of water from the Jordan River that eventually works its way back out the other end. All right? So you take a look at the Sea of Galilee. Looks just like about any other lake you might imagine, but you can see the hills in every direction on the sides. This is the view from Capharnaum. I wrote it the way that it's on the signs there. We all know it as Capernaum in our Bibles and our Bible maps in the back of our Bibles. But today they are saying Capharnaum, and that's how I'm going to use it from here on out. This lake is responsible for about 1/10 of the drinking water of Israel. That is in large part because of massive investment in desalination plants and other ways of reducing water usage. Because, of course, if they take too much water from the Sea of Galilee or the Jordan River, they're in real trouble because there's not backup sources. All right. Fortunately, when we were there, the Sea of Galilee was about as high as it's been in a long time. We'll see a picture of a church that looks like it's about 8 feet from the water, and you're thinking that's a real close spot to build your church. The water is usually a ways away from here, so it was high at the moment. And here is the view from Capharnaum west across. So this is the width of it. Again, you can see the other side. You can see there's buildings over there. In the distance is Tiberias. That's where we stayed. That's where most pilgrims/tourists, I think both titles work for people that go there for a trip. You may in your heart be a pilgrim, but you're also a tourist. And even the more jaded tourists, by the time they get done visiting Israel, are a little bit of a pilgrim, I think. And so I've referred to it in both directions. So, of course, the Sea of Galilee has been a massive fishing industry going back to the earliest recorded mentions of it. All right, there are 12 native species. Now they've added some non-native species, and I don't know how well that's working because, of course, non-native species you got to be careful with. But they still have a sizable fishing industry using it to this day. And, of course, famously, about half of Jesus' disciples were fishermen living on the shores of this lake. All right, and so when you say to yourself, right, and I'll mention this several times, is this where Jesus stood? Was Jesus here? That's a question everybody wants to know about just about everywhere, right? Well, if you're floating around in the middle of the Sea of Galilee, you're not far off, because he was back and forth on this lake a number of times in the Gospels. It says they crossed over from one side to the other. And so they were somewhere around here floating on this. So the first place that we went to on our trip, once we settled into Tiberias that first night and got over our jet lag and all of that, was Capharnaum or Capernaum. All right, this is an excellent place because of how much excavation work has been done. We're really going to see some details that have been learned. So you see that the village is not far at all from where the Sea of Galilee is right now. And it probably wasn't that much further, depending on where the water levels were 2,000 years ago, because, of course, this is a fishing village. And the boats are going to be dragged up on shore along the village every night. Well, every morning when they come back in from fishing overnight. I'm not going to belabor the text because I could have picked any number of texts to talk about any particular location. But of course, famously in the Gospel of Mark, in Capernaum or Capharnaum, is where we have the men that bring their friend, their relative, the text doesn't tell us, to see Jesus. But the crowds are so packed in that they can't get anywhere near him. So they go up on the roof, remove the tiles or the thatch or whatever the roof was, and lower him in front of Jesus. That took place in one of these buildings. Of course, unless they haven't excavated the actual one, but they've excavated a lot of this town. The picture on the right is showing the bulk of the town as it stood in Jesus' day, which would have been maybe 2,000 people, something like that. We would call that a village, but it's a good-sized town for the ancient world. So what do we see in this town? On the first note where we are. We are on the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee, about 3 miles west of where the Jordan River flows in. This is the adopted hometown of Jesus. He's not welcome at Nazareth, but he is in Capernaum. This is one of the places that welcomed him the most. And of course, it is the hometown of Peter, James, John, Andrew, and Matthew. So basically, half of the disciples are fishermen, and half of them come from this small village. Right? You put up on that sign coming into town who the famous son of your town is, right? The one that was a senator or played in the NBA or whatever, right? I remember going through West Virginia and seeing Randy Moss's hometown. NFL player, made the Pro Bowl a few times. You're driving through this little town and it says, home of Randy Moss. And you're like, oh, he lived here. Well, Capernaum's got some bragging rights, right? We got Peter, James, John, Andrew, and Matthew, compete with that. It was prosperous during the Roman period, which is, of course, the time of Christ, and later into the Byzantine period. Maximum population somewhere around that 1,500 to 2,000. It's hard to exactly nail that down, but a working commercial center based on this fishing industry. The town's church and synagogue, unfortunately, were destroyed during a 7th century Persian invasion. And get used to hearing that, because almost every building has either been reconstructed or excavated because it was destroyed between the 7th and 13th century by the Persians, the Mamelukes, one or the other, even a few of them by the Mongols when they invaded. So that happened a lot. So we do not have the synagogue that was there in Jesus' day because it was destroyed. We don't have the church that was first built on the site because it was destroyed. But they did find this, and that is a pretty interesting sight. If you look at this capital on the top of this column, what do you see right in the middle at the top? We just started Hanukkah, so that's your clue. It's a menorah. And this is one of the earliest examples of a second temple. That would be the temple rebuilt under Ezra and Nehemiah, and then, of course, expanded by Herod the Great. A second temple menorah, one of the oldest examples of that, outside of course, the temple area. And so there was, at one point, a thriving and fairly prosperous synagogue here because they had the wherewithal to decorate with this. This is somewhere about the house of Peter. And you're saying to me, how do we know it's the house of Peter? Get used to this as well. It's the traditional house of Peter. There is absolutely no way to be certain almost every time whether or not the traditional site of this or the traditional site of that is right, or if it's actually about 30 feet that way or a quarter mile that way, because sometimes we just can't be sure. But this was the place that in the 4th century, which was much closer to the time of Peter than we are, in the 4th century they built what was known as a Domus Ecclesia there. A house of the Prince of the Apostles was changed into a church. The walls, however, are still standing as they were. So a 4th century Christian writer says, I went to Capernaum, and the house that Peter lived in is still standing. They built a church around it, which is a cool thing to do. It's, the boyhood home of Abraham Lincoln kind of thing. We're turning this into a church. We built a wall around it. We built the church on that site. Later in the 5th century, they built an octagonal church, we're getting fancy here, within the perimeter of that original wall above Peter's room. So somebody was like, we want to actually be on the spot, but we don't want to disturb it, so we're just going to build it above Peter's old room. And actually, this modern church is taking that inspiration. We'll look at that here in a minute. So this underneath the modern church is what that room was. As far as we can tell, that's the room that Peter either grew up in or lived in or whatever, because in the 4th century they said, no, this is the place. So let's take a look. How would you like that to be the middle of your church? Right in front of the altar, there's this big glass section that you can walk on. It's the thick glass. And right below it is Peter's room. And so when you stand up to sing your songs, when you do your prayers, when you go up to take, this is a Catholic church, when you go up to take Mass, you're walking right over the top of Peter's room. That's pretty cool, right? Not too many times I've never heard of another church that has a glass floor, although St. Joe's does have the glass floor on the side there, but not right in the middle of the worship space, right? That's pretty cool. And you can see on the right the way in which they constructed that. The superstructure underneath there is the original buildings, the ruins of those buildings, and then the white would be the modern church that was built over the top of it, the Memorial Church of St. Peter, built in 1982. This is not a historic church because, of course, the design is very modern, but it's a pretty cool church to visit. All right, you've got the floor in the middle with the glass. You have these nice carvings as well. And it is literally built over the ruins of that 5th century church that was built over Peter's house. So they built a church above Peter's house, and now the modern church is sitting up above that. And that is a theme also that we will see. We build on top. That is the rule of what was before. So I said we don't have the synagogue of Jesus, but we have some interesting information nonetheless, because this is the synagogue that was built later on the ruins, on the foundation of the synagogue that existed in Jesus' day. Jesus was in that synagogue in Capernaum many times for worship, for teaching, and so he would have been right in this building, just not this building, because this is the more recent one. So let's look at this, and that will give you a lot to process. So the lower level, see the difference in the stone? It's pretty obvious here, isn't it? The bottom is black basalt, and basalt just is volcanic rock. It's all over the place in much of Galilee. This is a cheap, local building block. If you look back at all of the ruins, where did they go? All the ruins, most of the same. So the synagogue in the time of Christ was built with local materials, and that's the foundation underneath. The later synagogue is from the 3rd or 4th century. We know that it's from the 3rd or 4th century for a number of reasons, but one of which is because the door faces toward Jerusalem. Every synagogue, every is a strong word, but generally speaking, synagogues built after the destruction of the temple have their main door facing where Jerusalem is. Before that, they had no reason to do so. All right, and so that's an indicator for archaeologists, for those studying. If you're not sure, is this 1st century, 2nd century, where is it? Well, which way is the door facing? And since it was facing Jerusalem, no, this is later. All right. We also know because there were some inscriptions and other evidence left behind here. So the lower level is the synagogue in the time of Christ. We know that one was built, according to Luke 7:5, by the centurion, right? He built our synagogue, is what they say about him when he's coming to have his servant be healed. Above it is the 3rd and 4th century synagogue, made with white limestone, which of course isn't from right here. It came from miles away, which means that the Jews living in Capernaum in the 3rd and 4th century were fairly well off. They were able to bring in this costlier stone when they rebuilt their synagogue, whether the old one was destroyed by fire or earthquake or whatever, or it was fallen down and they said, let's build a better one. And they built it on the foundation of the old one with the more costly stone. So let's take a look at that synagogue. It's had an 80 by 60 foot prayer hall, so good sized, right? There must have been a significant number of worshipers for them to make it that size. And that is a look at the entrance, the hallway leading to the prayer hall on the right. And you can see this is the front right as you're walking in. Down below, you see the foundation as well of the lower part from the previous synagogue. And I didn't take this picture because I didn't see this spot, but I found it. This is an inscription in Greek on one of the columns. There's two different inscriptions. This one thanks the man, the families that helped pay for it, which this is what you do on buildings, right? That's what happens. That's why our church has rooms named after individuals, as many of our churches do, or have plaques or whatever. They just carved it right into the limestone, which of course we love to see today. So that is Capernaum, hometown of many disciples, place where Jesus did many miracles, a decent-sized fishing village with a good-sized synagogue. At the time, which of course makes sense because Jesus went into the synagogue many times. Questions about Capernaum or Capharnaum, however you want to pronounce it, before we move on to the next location. We're 25 slides in 40 minutes. We'll see how I do. So the next one is just up over on the lakefront, and I told you there was a church that's real near the water level. This is the one, the Church of the Primacy of St. Peter, because the water is not nearly this close most of the time. It was just high when we were there. This church was built on the traditional site of this verse here, John 21. It's only in the Gospel of John. It says, when they'd finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Yes, Lord, he said, you know that I love you. Jesus said, feed my lambs. We know how this continues. He asks him again. Peter says, yes. He asks him again. Peter is hurt because he's like, oh, I get it. This is about the denial. This is the traditional site of where that took place. In the middle of this church is the traditional site where they put the food and ate this meal that it was talking about. As you walk into the site, you notice something, these channels flowing with water. There are a bunch of springs on the side of this hill, which have been used for thousands of years, which makes it a good place for some of the things that we believe took place right hereabouts. In a minute, we're going to be looking at the Beatitudes and the feeding of the 5,000, and having a water source nearby is a very helpful thing. And so I found that to be interesting, but it's a very dry area, right? Galilee is much wetter compared to southern Judea near Jerusalem, but still, it's not overflowing with abundant water. And so we next noticed these. What are all these pavilions doing? And this was the first site where we saw them. It's only the second place we had been to on our trip, and they became a familiar sight. These have been built at basically every tourist/pilgrim spot where these buses pull up and all the people get out and the tour guide wants to take people around. And they're built so that the groups can take a moment and do a worship service. Sing. We actually, when we were there was a group in Spanish taking a communion from a Catholic priest at one of these pavilions. Most of the pavilions, while we were going from place to place, were being used. You have to reserve them ahead of time, and then you can use them. We used a couple of them on our time as well. And so otherwise you'd be thinking, what are all these things there for? They're planning ahead, right? They know they've got so many visitors coming. They want to give them their own space. so that not everybody is crowding around the one spot everybody came to see, right? It's kind of smart like that. So this is the church of the primacy. St. Francis of Assisi visited in 1219. So that was a while ago. And the banner on the side of the building was celebrating the 800th anniversary of when St. Francis had been there. The church itself is not ancient, but it's built, as the theme goes, on the foundation of the 4th century church, which was destroyed in 1263. That's during the Crusader period. So the foundation of this church, and I didn't focus in on that. You can see that on the bottom left, the foundation. The foundation is an extra, is 1,600 years old, give or take. The church itself was only built in 1933. But with that rock, which may or may not be the particular rock that they had lunch on, but they were on the shore somewhere around here when Jesus said those things to Peter. And this would be the Sea of Galilee once more from the primacy. You can see we're not far from Capernaum, just up a little bit. That's modern art, but I liked it. This is a sculpture that a modern artist created about the restoration of the Apostle Peter. The next site is Tabgha, which on the next slide means 7 springs in Greek. I showed you those springs before. That's a quarter mile from where we just were. All right, we only moved about a quarter of a mile away. We got back on the bus. You're like, okay, how far are we going? And 2 minutes later, we're pulling in to the next parking lot. You're like, oh, right next door. Matthew 14, right? It says, when Jesus heard what had happened, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. Hearing of this, the crowds followed him on foot from the towns. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them and healed their sick. As evening approached, the disciples came to him and said, this is a remote place. It's already getting late. Send the crowds away so they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food. Somewhere on this hillside, near these springs, near Capernaum and these other villages, is where Jesus fed the 5,000. The people were gathered around and there's, again, this is the ancient world. There's no Walmart for them to go to and buy food. There's nowhere to get food. And of course, the disciples raised that objection. Even if we had the money, where could we get it and how could we get it here and all of that? I snapped a picture of this because, of course, we know the famous analogy that Jesus says, if you cause one of my little ones to sin, it would be better if you had a millstone tied around your neck and were thrown into the sea. Well, this is a millstone, and you can see that it would not go well for you if you had one of these tied around your neck. Now, he's not being literal. It's a metaphor, but you can see it's a metaphor with some teeth to it. Because you would not survive having a millstone attached to you. They're quite heavy. So this is the church at Tabgha, and it does not look very old for the same reason. We're going to get to some ancient churches eventually, but all of these are built where there are ruins of ones from before. Let's take a look. The map on the left shows you the original 4th century church in orange. The modern church outline is there as well. So the church built there right now incorporates the same space as the 4th century church. The 4th century church was built around the holy rock, is the traditional stone where Jesus sat the food while he was blessing it to multiply it. I have no idea if he sat it on a rock or not because the text doesn't tell us what he did, but that was a lot of food. So it had to go somewhere. And so that has been a site since the 4th century where a church was built. In the 5th century, a Byzantine church, that would be the Byzantines, that would be the eastern half of the empire centered around Constantinople. They built a church with tiled mosaics, and we're going to take a look at them. They're absolutely beautiful on that same site. In the 7th century, the story repeats itself. The church was destroyed. But of course, when you destroy a church and knock it over, sometimes you preserve, accidentally, the tiles under the rubble, and that's what happened here. In 1982, the German Association of the Holy Land, which I bet is a mouthful in German, it's probably one word, builds a modern church on the foundations of that destroyed church and starts restoring the original 5th century mosaics. And by saying that they're restoring them, I mean they are restoring them. We walked in, and these 4 guys were sitting there, working on the floor that very day. There got one guy at the computer, no doubt making sure that they were working according to plan. And that is, of course, very meticulous work. How does it look? Can you tell the old from the new? The original tiles are the faded and darker ones. The restored tiles are the lighter ones. But you can see that this 5th century church had an amazing tiled floor. Beautiful artwork. A lot of care went into that. Some of you do puzzles, right? Do a 2,000-piece puzzle. Well, imagine doing this whole mosaic floor, like 30 feet by whatever, right? That's a lot of pieces. That's going to take a while. And no corner pieces to help you cheat in this case. So, because you can see the individual tile size is quite small there. So that would have been an awful lot of work. The holy rock that they're talking about, these days, the only part of it you can see is under the altar there. And that it's not polite just to walk up in a church like this uninvited and poke your face in there. So we took a picture from here. I actually didn't know that's what it was when I took the picture. I just thought it was a nice view of the modern sanctuary with the tile floor. You can see this whole section is done. So they've got a lot of it done, working on you. It's you got some plants, you got some water birds, I guess. I'm not exactly sure what the whole thing was originally. Maybe this was the flora and fauna of the area, and that's what they were doing. Certainly not a biologist to know that. But imagine you go to church, because this is a working church, and you're walking around on 1,600-year-old tile floor. That's pretty impressive, right? In this room, we're walking around on 150-ish year old hardwood floor. And we say to ourselves, it's not half bad, right? We just got it redone. It looks decent aside from the buckling over there, from the foundation settling. But imagine multiplying that by 10. Hardwood's not going to get us another 1,500 years. This tile, though, can last us certainly in a drier climate. As well, and it was under rubble for who knows how many centuries after the original church had been destroyed. So you're saying to yourself, well, what does this area look like? I can't tell from inside a church where Jesus was preaching. There you go. This is the site just up the hill from Tabgha and the Church of the Primacy. The Capernaum would be on the left down by the water, the Church of the Primacy about straight ahead, and then Tabgha a little bit up to the right from there. This is the side of the hill on the northern end of the Sea of Galilee. We're just a little bit west of the inflow of the Jordan River, where the Sermon on the Mount is believed to have taken place. It was somewhere around here. Again, we've got some springs, so there's water for people. We've got a comparatively flat area, which may account for the fact that one says it was a sermon on the hill and the other says it was a plain, because you could describe it either way from right here. This is around here, this is a plain. Right? This is flat ground somewhere around the Sea of Galilee, because there's not much of that. But we are still on the side of the hill, because of course you can't help that. But it would have been an amazing place to hear Jesus give that sermon. And of course the text of the Beatitudes there and the church that has been built on that site. I'll tell the story of that church here in a minute. One of the things that I noticed there was a good chance to get a picture of the fruit orchards all around the Sea of Galilee and many other places in the Jordan River Valley. There are today extensive agricultural work being done. In this case, fruit trees, pineapples and papayas and that kind of stuff, bananas. But they cover them all with nets. And that took some getting used to. They cover them with nets to keep the birds out from eating half the crop. And so everywhere you see these nets, you're like, oh, what are they growing in there? Something that the birds would love to be eating. So there was a kibbutz, which of course is a farming collective, just down the hill from the church. This is the Church of the Beatitudes. There used to be a 4th century Byzantine church right near here. They didn't, in this case, build it on top of the old one, but nearby. And you see inside the church a modern octagonal church. Modern is 1936, right? In this case, that's very modern. That's brand new when you're over there. One of the things that made me laugh is that our tour guide kept saying, oh, that's the new one. And by new one, he means it was the one the Crusaders built in the 1200s. Because when you walk around a land where you've got things that are 2,000 years old and 3,000 years old and 4,000 years old, something that's 800 years old is the new one. That's not the way it works in America, right? Because that's not the way our minds work with history. But one of the things that really jumped out at me when we were at the site of the Sermon on the Mount was just how international pilgrimage to the Holy Land is now. So we're walking around with our group of 50, right? Our tour guide has a little thing with a mic, and we've all got these little battery-powered radio things with earplugs so that we can hear him. And we're wandering around following him as he's explaining things. And you look around, and here's another tour guide speaking in Spanish, and there's one in a language from India, and Chinese, and Brazilians, Nigerians, people from India, people from South Korea. We saw people from everywhere while we were touring these sites. And honestly, this was the kind of thing that you don't think of as a Westerner and as an American, is that people that looked like us were less than half of the people there. Normally when you're a tourist, right, as an American, as a rich Westerner, you see a lot of people that look like you because we have the money to do this. But when we were over there, we saw a ton of people from all over the world. Again, that's what we should expect if this is a place being visited by the church today. Because the church today is not white, and it's not English speaking, not statistically. And that was a fascinating thing. I talked to a Portuguese gentleman waiting in line. I took pictures for some Nigerians when they were all trying to figure out who couldn't be in the picture. I was like, do you want me to take the picture? And then they handed me the camera, and then like 4 other people from their group handed me cameras, and I'm like holding on to all these cameras trying to take pictures for them. It was awesome. But that's just what you see over there now. But to me, it's also a reminder how much more of a sacrifice. It was not that difficult for us to raise the funds. We had a grant and a fundraiser and all of that for us to go. But if you're living in India, in Nigeria, in a lot of other places around the world where living standards are much lower, the amount of saving, the amount of work that would go into this trip is comparatively much, much higher. So to me, it was a very encouraging sight to see people from all over the place. And I thought, you know what, we're looking at a bunch of dusty buildings. We also should look at what grows around there. So this is a few yards away from the Church of the Beatitudes with the Sea of Galilee in the background and something flowering. I certainly can't tell you what it is. Questions about that's the last of the side of the hill where a whole bunch of the Gospels takes place, right? A bunch of miracles, a bunch of teaching, all takes place on the side of this hill hereabouts. All righty, we are making good time now. I'm more optimistic. One of the things that I was able to snap from that church is this picture here. Our guide had already told us about this, and I was looking for a spot where I could take a good picture. Do you see the gap in the hills? right? I told you that the Sea of Galilee is a big bowl, right? Well, it is, except for in this particular spot in the northern corner of the Sea of Galilee. You see on the map where the orange ends, there is a gap. And that gap is the trail, the ancient footpath that leads to Nazareth. So every time the disciples are going from Cana to the Sea of Galilee, from Nazareth to the Sea of Galilee, they're walking this path. It's known as the Gospel Trail, and you can see it starts in Nazareth, and you're saying, why didn't we just go straight? You live in Pennsylvania. You know why they didn't go straight, because you can't go straight from here to there. That curve is the route that actually can get you between the two of them. And so it comes out on the northern end of the Sea of Galilee, not far from Capernaum. And so it was very natural for Jesus to come here from Nazareth along this route. Along the way of this route is Cana. We'll get to there. Megiddo, we'll get to there. And of course, Nazareth. But also something that I had heard about, but most people will not be familiar with. That was Hattin. The Battle of Hattin was the site where Salah ad-Din destroyed the Crusader army that allowed him to recapture Jerusalem and basically bring an end to the Crusader kingdom. That is right up along this route as well. Which leads us to a village that is right at the foot of that gap. Magdala. Sound like something you've heard of, doesn't it? Because this, we believe, is the birthplace of Mary Magdalene. That's what Mary of Magdala. Up until 2007, nobody knew where that was. It was around here somewhere, but nobody had ever found it. Again, most of the sites have never been excavated, because if you could excavate this whole nation, right, everywhere you dig, you're going to find something. So there are excavations that'll happen until the end of time around here, and they won't get to all of them. In 2007, the people that owned this resort on the left wanted to expand under an area that had been covered in sand. Well, sand is another great thing to preserve ruins, and so they got permission from the government, of course, and it's a very complicated thing over there, and they started doing their excavating work with someone to make sure that there weren't any things, and boom, there it is. Right next to their building was this village, and they started uncovering it and found a couple of really interesting things. Underneath this wooden ceiling roof is the synagogue of Magdala, one that likely Jesus visited and taught in, because the door does not face towards Jerusalem. So this preceded the building of this synagogue, the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. And so you're saying, well, what's in it? This. Now, that's not the actual one, because the actual one is priceless, and they're not just going to leave it sitting out in the open under some plexiglass. It's in a museum. It's known as the Magdala Stone. They found it in 2009, and it has carvings on it that depict the Second Temple. This is the oldest. I told you that menorah in Capernaum was pretty old. This is the oldest depiction of a temple menorah found in any synagogue. And that's the kind of thing that fascinates historians. When did the synagogues start becoming places of worship in their own right? Right? When did they start filling that function that we would associate with a church? Rather than just being for teaching, when were they places of worship? That's a great question, and this is part of that answer. Well, we've got this temple iconography in the synagogue. That means something. That's probably part of the answer. They think this was a reading desk or a podium, so when they brought out the scroll and the elder read from it, they would sit it on this. We talked about tiled floors. Here's some other beautiful tiled floors from this synagogue. So these tile floors are about 2,000, 2,100 years old. And of course, they were preserved because this wall was covered in sand. This village, or there was nothing built over the top of it other than a small village down through the centuries. And so you can see again, we saw in the Christian churches, right? Beautiful 4th century, 3rd century tiled floor. Here in the Jewish synagogue. One of the things that I want to make sure that you don't get the false impression of is that the ancient world didn't have any color in it. Because all of these sites are so bland, right? It's just whitewashed, gray or white or whatever. It's blah. Where is the color? Oh, it was colorful. But time is not kind to paint on plaster. It does not survive unless it gets buried and then it gets preserved, because these are the interior walls of the synagogue, showing how they were originally painted with some oranges, reds, yellows, some sort of geometric pattern that was on the interior walls. Hard to say what the rest of it was because most of it was destroyed. But these buildings were as colorful as ours are today because the people cared about them. They put the effort into making them beautiful. And sometimes more than we do because of the floors, the hangings, the carvings, and all of that sort of thing. Here's the spring-fed water channel of the village, and that's one of the reasons why this village was here. There's a spring nearby. They built a channel to bring water into the village. This, it only lasts a few seconds. That's how windy it was there. Why? There's the gap right in the background. That gap that I told you about where the trail comes down from Nazareth is a natural air funnel. So the people who lived in this village would not have had any issue with mosquitoes, I don't think, because the wind would have been blowing through on a regular basis, because it's this natural funnel for this air coming through onto the Sea of Galilee and providing some of that breeze that became the storm that nearly swamped the boat when Jesus was with his disciples. And so I found that to be something worth recording for a few seconds. You can see the excavation work here is ongoing, but they've uncovered much of the town. Oops, it did that again. This is a mikveh, a ritualistic bathing pool. Of course, this was a Jewish village, and so they had a synagogue, and so you had to deal with ceremonial cleanliness, right? And there were a number of different, depending on which school of thought you would have been following there, a number of different ways in which this was incorporated. How we wash before we do certain things. And so there would have been a number of these in this town, spread, probably supplied by the spring with the water, of course, and then the people would use that to prepare themselves for worship. When you look out the side of the village, you see the hillside. That's the hillside around the Sea of Galilee. Scrub grass, right? It very rocky and a little bit of stuff growing. What's going to be on those hillsides? Sheep, basically. And shepherds, for time immemorial, have been using these hillsides for their sheep. You can't see them that well, but there's 2 or 3 of them you can see from here, tiny little caves. And of course, they would have used the caves for shelter. They would have used the caves for sheep pens and that sort of thing as well. And they still are. There's a bunch of livestock grazing on the side of this hill even while we were there. Some things never change. Questions about about Magdala? Let's flip around to the southern end of the Sea of Galilee where the Jordan River flows out. And you're saying to yourself, I've got a picture of the Jordan River in my mind, don't you? Joshua crossing the Jordan River on dry ground, right? What did that look like? And if you're thinking some combination of the Allegheny or French Creek, then you're not right. Because you don't get a river with that much water in it. with the amount of rain that they get over there, right? The Jordan River is fed by springs up in Lebanon, and also the snow melt from the higher elevations, but it's not going to be fed by the kind of rain that we get day after day sometimes. So it's not going to be 100 yards wide. That's just not going to happen. So the Jordan River is what we would call a crick or a creek, depending on which one y'all say around here. I think I grew up calling it a crick. Are you creek people or crickers? Well, either it's soda or pop, right? Make your pick. So the Jordan River is not that big, but here it is. And this is the traditional site of the baptism of Jesus by John. We know that he was baptized by John in the Jordan. The text doesn't tell us how far up or down the river they exactly were. But this is the site. And most of these sites, the claim to fame goes back to like the 3rd, the 4th century. So if they didn't know where it was, we're not going to outsmart them. So might as well go with the site that they picked. And so, of course, you have the text from Mark 1:9. At that time, Jesus came from Nazareth in Galilee and was baptized by John in the Jordan. So if he was coming from Nazareth, he would have taken that trail down to Capernaum and then probably either a boat to the southern tip of the Sea of Galilee and then got out. And this is only about a mile or so from where the water leaves the Sea of Galilee. I guess they were figuring, how far is Jesus going to walk, right? Or how close to the Sea of Galilee was John the Baptist? No idea. But he descends to the water. John baptizes him. Of course, you have the voice from heaven. So what do people do at the Sea of Galilee, the Jordan River? Well, the two of us stopped for a picture just to let you know that, yes, indeed, this was us. We were the ones that were there. They do this. They get baptized. So being baptized in the Jordan River has been a tradition going back centuries. And it is a big deal. And there's a whole thing, right? If you want to do it, you rent a robe and a towel, because of course, who's bringing that stuff with them and who wants to take a wet towel with them back on the bus? The tourists don't like that sort of thing. So you rent it, you go in and you get a pavilion for your group, and you use your allotted time, and there it is. There was a whole lot of singing happening from the people down away from us and then from the Nigerians, and it was pretty cool in that respect. I would say 2/3 of our group of about 50 decided to do so. And I snapped a couple of pictures. ABCOPAD is the American Baptist Churches of Pennsylvania and Delaware, which is why we use the acronym. That's my region in the denomination. And one of our pastors named Bud Russell, he was our tour liaison. He's the guy that helped organize the tour. And Janice and Felicia are two pastors from Pittsburgh. Two of our female pastors. They're awesome. They're the ones that we flew with. We went out of Pittsburgh with Felicia and Janice and my wife and I, and then we met everyone else in Newark and went from there. They're like, well, do you want to drive to Newark or drive to Pittsburgh? I'm like, those are not equal choices. I will fly out of Pittsburgh. It's only 6 hours closer or whatever. And so a lot of people get baptized in the Jordan. And I also thought it was great. There were fish everywhere in the Jordan River. Big fish, little fish. It was full of fish. I'm like, hey, it's fairly healthy. And the ducks were just floating around. No doubt the people in this area are losing crackers and food and throwing things at the ducks. The ducks aren't dumb. They're like geese around here. They'll beg for things. And so no doubt they are plenty well fed. They put those barriers up so people don't go out into the deeper parts, and of course, they don't want anyone drowning, because not everyone who comes to the Jordan to be baptized can swim, I would assume. And you can go out to where those gates are and only be about 3 feet deep. So somebody along the way put these all over the site. There's like 50 of them. It's the text that I read from Mark 1 in a whole bunch of different languages. And so I thought that Hawaiian Pidgin English was cool. And you can read some of that. I will not try to read it because my attempt will sound mocking, because you can't read that without pretending to have some sort of accent. And I don't even know which one would be the right one. But there's that. And the other one, because I am this kind of a nerd who has a Star Wars cup, I couldn't help but take a picture of Jawa. Now that's not the sand people from Tatooine. That's not what that language is, but when I see that, that's where my head goes. And so there were German and French and English, they were all over the place. A very popular site. Lots of people there every day for baptisms. Well, Tiberias is where we stayed. On the left-hand side is a picture from my Garmin, which is what my watch records my running on. I'm a runner, and I said to myself, I can't go to Israel without having at least one run that shows that it happened there, so that I could share it with my friends and all of that. And so I ran from the hotel down along the Sea of Galilee for a couple of miles and then turned around and came back. It wasn't that exciting a run because it was all on paved, the bike trail next to it, and that's paved trails I don't like. But that was cool. And then I also worked on my sermon because I was over there and I was getting back 2 days before Sunday, and I had to have my sermon ready. So I said to myself, one part of me is saying, don't work on your sermon when you're in Israel. And the other part is, work on it while you're there, right? When are you ever going to work on a sermon when you're in Israel? So I sat at night in the amphitheater. In the background are 16th century Ottoman ruins. But because those are modern, they're not a big deal, and nobody really cares about those ones. There's not signs or any such thing, because all around you are ones that are, much, much older. So we sat in the amphitheater, worked on my sermon. What do we got there? Romans 10. So I've been working on Romans for a long time, for about the last 70 messages. And so that's where that part of it got written. And so this is Tiberias. This is a modern town, all right, in the sense that it looks like a modern town. There's 50,000 people living in Tiberias in 20 AD, so during the time of Christ. Herod Antipas, not Herod the Great, he was dead, but Herod Antipas, his relative, he's the one that had John the Baptist killed, so not a nice guy. Founded the city after the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. This is why this place is important to our story. After the destruction of Jerusalem, this was the largest city left in the world that had a majority Jewish population. They were scattered all over the empire and beyond, right? There were plenty of Jews living in Ephesus and Athens and Rome, but here in Tiberias there was a sizable population, and so this is where the Mishnah and the Talmud were compiled. That's the oral tradition of the teachings of the rabbis down through the centuries, eventually written down as the Talmud and the Mishnah, which, if you practice Judaism, they're very important commentaries. They would be for us like the Institutes of Religion by John Calvin, right? Where Calvin writes this huge commentary on the Bible, and people to this day are saying, well, what did Calvin have to say about this? Or what do you have to say about that? Well, the Mishnah and the Talmud are that for Judaism. They're all the commentaries of the various rabbis down through the centuries arguing about what exactly it means to keep the Sabbath, for example. And there's chapter after chapter about that kind of topic. And so those were compiled and preserved in this town after the destruction of the temple. It has a typical history. In the 16th century, all the residents in this town were Muslims. No one else was allowed to live there. Beginning in the 18th century, the Ottomans relaxed the rules, and Jewish immigrants began to arrive. So that by 1948, it was about 50-50. A Arab-Muslim population and a Jewish population, many Sephardis, Jews from the Spanish diaspora. In 1948, when the war broke out, the Palestinian Arab residents besieged the Jewish residents. They lived in separate neighborhoods, as you might imagine. And the British evacuated the entire population after the war when the Israeli forces had their victory. And so now today, the city is almost entirely Jewish, like 90+%. So it was all Muslim, Palestinian, and then it was mixed, and now it's all Jewish. War, immigration, all of those things tell the stories of why things become what they become. And this is, of course, also the place where a massive pilgrim tourist industry is based for Galilee. There are big hotels here. Our hotel had a common lunch or breakfast and dinner, and there were probably 400 or 500 people from 10 or 11 groups staying there at the same time as us. And so you definitely know that's a big part of their economy. What about Cana in Galilee? This particular Cana of Galilee is 8 miles from Nazareth. There's apparently some controversy as to whether or not this town or a different town is the right Cana. In this case, they're not even saying it's the same town. But this is the traditional one. And in John chapter 2, verse 1, on the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and that tells you how that story went. And of course, she tells him, help them out, and he says, not now. And she says, he's going to help you out. Which I find to be a fascinating insight into the relationship between Jesus and his mother. We will leave it at that. This is a modern church in the sense that it was 19th century, 1881. The Catholic Franciscans run this church, and I just had one picture of the inside because it's a fairly modern church. What's interesting is what's down below. Below the church, and this is Archaeology 101, if you want to find the older, go lower. Dig. Beneath the church are the remains of tombs that were in use during the Christian Byzantine area. Of course, they can figure out from inscriptions and remains and whatnot that these were Christian burials. So the Byzantines were using this space for a tomb. But before that, it was a Jewish synagogue. So you're saying this is right about the kind of thing, right? They were having a wedding, probably at somebody's residence, and so Jesus was hereabouts. We don't, of course, know what house they did that at, but in the basement of this church, they have an example of what a big stone jar from back in the day looks like. They vary by shape and size because the stone that you started with is going to be the stone, is going to influence how tall or how wide or how big the stone jar is. You hollow it out, and there you go. And so someone said to me, I always pictured them carrying the stone jars that Jesus, no. They filled the jars with water, he turned it to wine, and then they dipped the pitchers in and take the wine. The stones aren't going anywhere, not anywhere easy. They're big and heavy, especially with how much liquid they held. They were significantly sized. And then the only other thing of note on our way back out, this is one of those sites that's hard to visit. You get out of your bus, you cross a busy street and you walk down an alley for about a quarter of a mile. There are no parking lots nearby. It's not like many of the other ones. On our way back, we went past the Church of St. Bartholomew, who also is known as Nathaniel, because this was his hometown. And so there was a church built here with that respect. Questions about this part of Galilee? We're going to start moving west here and move over by the shore.
I'm not sure there's a question or comment, but
Yeah.
I'm looking at these beautiful pictures. In my mind, superimposed on this beautiful scenery are the signs of all the war.
Right.
And all the destruction that you see every time I'm in business. It breaks your heart.
It does. So one of the questions that was asked before we went is, aren't you worried about terrorism? And I said, and my reasoning was, I get on a plane, any could be the target of terrorists going anywhere, right? A plane with Westerners on it is always going to be a target. So a plane to Israel is probably the safest plane you're going to get because of the extra security. When I landed there, the only place we saw soldiers in May, it's changed, was in Jerusalem, and that was 2 at an intersection and 2 over there at an intersection. It wasn't anything. I saw more soldiers when I was in Guatemala in 1999 because their civil war had just ended. And so you didn't have any sense. And our tour guide, Mike, is a Palestinian Christian. His family lives in the West Bank. You know, that was his view. These are just people. Most of us are just people trying to live our lives. We're neighbors. Yeah. But it only takes 1% of the Palestinians and 1% of the Jewish settlers to start a war, or whatever, right? Less than 1%. It took 19 people to start 9/11, right? Plus the financiers and all the rest. But I mean, it doesn't take much. And so, yeah, normally people are living, working. Mosques are next to churches. Nobody has a problem. Right? No, there's not an issue until there is, right? And so, yeah, that is part of the sad tragedy of it. And of course, most of the places that I'm showing you pictures of, the people that live there depend greatly on the pilgrims. They were crushed by COVID when it shut down for a year. They were just getting back on their feet, getting back, so that they were out of debt and all of that sort of thing. And now this is, of course, going to disrupt that whole, I don't know how badly the numbers have fallen off, but they must be pretty bad. Because we drove through the West Bank to go, and that certainly tours wouldn't be doing that right now because of the threats. So, it does break your heart, and it is the kind of thing that even if almost everyone wants peace, that doesn't make it so, unfortunately.
Do you wonder, is this building still standing?
No. So none of the places we visited were that close to Gaza. We didn't go to Gaza. None of the sites are in Gaza. Gaza used to be Philistia, right? In your biblical story, that's where David and Saul fought against the Philistines. The Philistines lived along that strip. It was a Phoenician area, and so there aren't any sites, any Christian sites, any Jewish sites, or even any real Muslim sites in Gaza. So no tourists are going there, but also because it's a modern, built-up place. Right, so in the West Bank, right, you've got Hebron, you've got Bethlehem, you've got Jericho, you've got a bunch of these places, and we visited a number of those. But the West Bank has only seen sporadic small arms kind of thing, shootouts and beatings and whatnot. They haven't seen artillery or any of that sort of thing, not in this era. Not in this particular round of fighting. It's all been in the southwestern corner down by Gaza. So the rockets flying towards Tel Aviv are landing who knows where. Fortunately, they're pretty darn random. So in that sense, because they're not able to hit a hospital or a school, they couldn't. They're too crude for that. Let's take a look at this map again, and I thought this one was more helpful in that respect. We were around the Sea of Galilee. We covered that. Now we are heading to the Valley of Jezreel. This is a sort of southeast to northwest valley that bisects the mountain range, right? You can see the mountains head north and continue into Syria. They head south towards Jerusalem. This is a gap in the mountains that is very key to history. You see where Megiddo is? You see that little gap, that little green in and around Megiddo? That's an ancient road running right through there. We'll get to that in a moment because that's where we're heading next. But notice this is a big, fertile valley surrounded by hilly scrubland. So this is prime real estate in this area. And you can see the green area going from the Sea of Galilee around to Nazareth. They went around the north. You could have gone around the south, but that's the longer route. But there's a reason why they didn't go straight, because that's over Mount Carmel. And it's walking a lot more up than you need to get from A to B. And people generally don't want to do that. So here are pictures of the Valley of Jezreel. I could have taken those in Iowa. Well, maybe not Iowa because you can see the hills on the side, but those could be in America. Corn, soybeans, wheat, right? I mean, this is an agricultural valley. This is also where Deborah and Barak defeated the Canaanites in Judges 4. It's where Gideon defeated the Midianites in Judges 6, in this valley. It's where Saul defeated the Philistines in 1 Samuel 29. Do you see a pattern? And it's where King Josiah was killed in battle against the Egyptians in 2 Kings 23. Why? Because this is the way that an army can go. An army is not traveling over the rugged mountains. An army is going to stick to a path, to a road, especially if they have chariots and wagons for their supplies. And so they're going to go through this valley. And so this is where the fighting took place. Again and again and again. I have the stats here. Somewhere. There they are. At least 34 battles from the Iron Age, which is all the way back to the beginning of recorded history, to 1973. All right, and that number can vary depending on what you consider a battle to be. But I mean, battles between empires, massive battles have taken place in this valley. All right, this is the most fought over patch of ground in the world. All right, now for like 3 years, that spot around Verdun was the worst, right? Because the Germans and the French were fighting over those few yards. But that was just for 3 years. This goes back to 3,000-4,000 BC. Battle after battle after battle, because control of this valley, number one, it's very valuable land, but also it allows you to control the north-south flow of traffic, the trade, the caravans that you can tax. And so there's a lot of that going on here. There's continuous settlement in this valley since 4500 BC. So, the last 6,500 years people have been living around here. Around there. And we can see the evidence of that. Here is the view of that valley from Tel Megiddo. And we're going to be talking about Tel Megiddo. It's one of my favorite places that I had like 2 spots, except for Jerusalem, that I wanted to see. Tel Megiddo was one and Masada was the other, and thankfully we went to both. This is the view from that hill, looking northeast across the valley. All right, you can see Nazareth on the left. We're going to see, but that's how wide the valley is. All right, if you can see the other side, it's not huge. And on the center is Nain, where of course one of the miracle we're going to talk about later took place. So what is a tell? I didn't take this picture. This is the first one that I borrowed from somebody else, because this was taken from a helicopter or a balloon or something, and I didn't have that opportunity. And a tell is an archaeological mound. Why is there a hill here? Because people have been living on this spot for 6,000 years. And the hill is artificial. The hill is layer after layer after layer of destroyed town. The next slide, I'll steal my own thunder. They've identified 20 separate layers on this hill. So 20 separate times, the town was destroyed. Earthquake, fire, siege, right? Rubble. And the people built on top of the rubble, using some, whatever stones could be reused, but most of it ruined. And so they just leveled it out again and built, and it got higher and higher and higher. These are how we find ancient cities that are lost, right? When you're saying, what happened to the ancient city of Troy? How did they find that site? They found a hill. And in good old 19th century fashion, they just started digging into the hill and didn't really worry about what they were destroying on the way. That's not how we do archaeology anymore, but that's the way they were doing it back then. Max Schliemann, that's his name, I believe. Grab that one out of thin air, if I'm right, remembering his name. So this hill is human history. So how do you excavate this? Think about that for a minute. If you want to excavate it and look at the Iron Age town, How can you do it? You got to take off all the layers above. You can't do that. You're going to destroy that. So what they typically do is they make a little channel. And you can see that here. You can see the channel that was excavated, right? That artificial chop. That was a group of archaeologists that said, we're going to take a slice and we'll catalog what we find on each layer, what pottery, what coins, what arrowheads, whatever, so that we can learn about it. But you can't just look at the bottom without destroying the top. So basically, they got to leave it like it is and only do a little bit of excavation work and try to figure out what's to learn otherwise. So this is Tel Megiddo, 20 layers, beginning as far back as 5000 BC. Solomon himself improved the city with palaces, water systems, and fortifications. So why does the name Megiddo sound familiar to you? It's because of Revelation 16:16. Then they gathered the kings together at the place that in Hebrew is called Armageddon. That's this place. That root of the word in Hebrew for Megiddo is Megiddo. The battle prophesied at the end of time will take place here. Why? It makes all the sense in the world. 34 times it's already happened because this is the battle site. So if John is going to see a vision of battles in the future, this one would have made a lot of sense to him. It would have been like, oh yeah, of course that. And so that name, Armageddon, didn't come out of thin air. It has a specific connection to this spot. And that's how big that hill is looking from the bottom. It's a hill. I mean, that's a respectable hill. We can do some hill sprints on that hill, wear people out in a real hurry. As you walk up it, you see they have done some excavation work. At one point, that was an entrance to the city. Because as it gets taller, now you've got steps and a natural fortification because we've got layers, and now it's like a castle. This is the gate system that was either built by Solomon or by Jeroboam II, somewhere in that 10th to 8th century. This was a serious fortification. This site was an important place in Israel's government for that theocracy because it controlled the entrance south, right past it, and the Jezreel Valley right in front of it. So they definitely built fortifications here, had a garrison, all of that kind of thing. When you get to the top, you're like, hey, where is everything? Well, it's underneath here, right? So they can't just randomly dig it around. This picture shows you gives you some perspective. How big was the city? That's a good-sized amount, right? That's a couple football fields worth at least. That's definitely a Walmart supercenter, right? Which it's a good size for a town in the ancient world. Here is that part that they excavated, that aerial view, that cut, and what they found is fascinating. Look in the middle. I'll show you a better picture on the next slide. Look in the distance. That's Mount Carmel. Mount Carmel in 1 Kings 18 is where Elijah defeated the prophets of Baal. And he said, let's call down fire from heaven. That was right behind here. That's a better view of it. Notice the circle in the middle? The circle in the middle is a Canaanite altar. So when Joshua, Judges, when they're talking about Canaanite worship and don't offer sacrifices like the Canaanites do and all of that kind of thing, this is an actual altar that through multiple generations was used. It says multiple temples were built on this site using this altar. So when Moses is told, you're going to go into the promised land because the sins of the Canaanites have reached the Lord and their time is up, it is this idolatry that had offended the Lord and brought forth that judgment. This is an example of that happening. And of course it was happening all over Canaan at the time. But to actually have found one of those altars is archaeologically very significant. But you can see the layers, right? See the palm tree right in the foreground? You can see it's just compacted layers of rubble and debris and dirt down through the centuries, layer after layer after layer. One of the things that we were able to do was go down into the water tunnel. They built a tunnel so that if the city was under siege, if the fort basically was under siege, they could still have access to the spring and they wouldn't be deprived of water. If a city is under siege and it doesn't have water, it's going to fall in days, right? If they have adequate food and a source of water, they can last months and months, and most sieges were never successfully concluded. Most of the time, the attackers gave up, and the defenders were able to win in world history. And so that water supply is hugely important. But to get to the tunnel, you have to go down 75 feet. This was built 1,000 years almost before the time of Christ, digging into the rock and making a 210-foot long tunnel to make sure if you're claustrophobic, if you don't like tunnels, all right, that's not going to be for you. But these guys made this tunnel. The picture on the right, mine didn't turn out very well. We didn't have that good lighting in order to do it. The one on the left was us coming back out. And one of the things I will say about this is if you've ever, again, once the violence that's happening right now is over, if you've ever wanted to go to the Holy Land, then go. Figure out a way to go. With a tour, with a reputable group, but go. Our group had 75% retired individuals. I would say we had a dozen people that were well over 70. And when we went down these stairs, I was in front of one of the ladies that had difficulty climbing stairs, and one of our other guys was behind her, and we got through it. A couple times some of our older folks had to stay on the bus because their legs, we would usually leave at 8 a.m. or 7:30 a.m. and get back at 6 p.m., which means 10, 12 hours on the bus, walking. And sometimes by the end of the day, they'd be like, yeah, this last one, we're just going to chill. That's enough. We already walked 3 miles. That was enough. But they all made it through. And it was beautiful to see because it meant so much to the lady that I was walking in front of. I found out why she came, because her mom, who had died 2 years before that, said, I'm going, and then she got sick and never went. And after her mom died, she said, I'm going to go. And so she went, and that was awesome, and I was glad to be able to help her. It made Nicole and I feel real young, too. We're like, we're the youngsters, right? And all of that. There was one other gentleman who was younger than us, but and I got his picture eventually in one of these when he was with us. So you look at, this is a better picture of the valley with Nazareth and Mount Tabor. I'll get a better picture of that from Nazareth, which is the traditional site of the Transfiguration, just across the way. Again, you start looking at this stuff and you're saying, this took place 2 miles from that. This took place a quarter mile from that. It's so compact because, again, this entire land from the far north to the south is no bigger than New Jersey, and it's narrower. So, of course, things took place near other things. They had to because it's not that wide. This is Mount Tabor from the summit of the hill above Nazareth. We went across the valley. Only took a few minutes, to the other side, went up the mountain, the Mount Precipice, and I'll show you that picture in a minute. But that on the left is where the Church of the Transfiguration is. It's not the kind of thing you take tour buses up to very easily because, as you can see, it's a like that. So we didn't go there, but that's the traditional site. The text says they went up a hill, up a mountain. It doesn't tell us which one. So who knows if that's the right site or not. So we've crossed to the other side of the valley, just a few miles away. Looking back across the other side is Nain and Mount Morah. And I got one slide here. And of course, Nain is where Jesus found the mother weeping for her only son that had just died. And he says, "Young man, I say, get up." The dead man sat up and began to talk, and Jesus gave him back to his mother. That happened at the village called Nain, and that's what this one is on the left in the distance. What about Nazareth? That's Nazareth. That's modern Nazareth. Nazareth is on the backside of the hill of the valley. Not on the front side, on the back side. So when Nathanael says, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" he says that because it's a hick town. It's not in the mainstream, all right? It's a quiet place, right? This valley where battle after battle after battle has taken place, the village is on the backside of the hill from the valley. Someone was thinking that through and said, we may avoid getting this place burned down a few times just by laying low when an army goes through, if we're not out where everyone can see us. But this was Jesus' hometown, and you can see it's a good-sized town in the modern sense. Luke 2:39 and 40, when Joseph and Mary had done everything required by the law of the Lord in Jerusalem, they returned to Galilee, to their own town of Nazareth. And so this is where Jesus grew up until his adulthood, and then he spends most of his time in Galilee and Jerusalem and places in between. Very little time here. Why? For the reason that we call this Mount Precipice. Luke 4, and there were many in Israel with leprosy in the time of Elisha the prophet, and yet not one of them was cleansed, only Naaman the Syrian. That's the end of Jesus' message. He gets up in the synagogue in Nazareth and says, "Oh, by the way, in these two huge moments in Israelite history, it was a non-Jew that God decided to heal," and then sits back down. It was not well received. The point was made. The people didn't appreciate it. All the people in the synagogue were furious when they heard this. They got up, drove him out of the town, took him to the brow of the hill on which the town was built in order to throw him off the cliff. But he walked right through the crowd and went on his way. That's a picture that my wife took of me reading that passage to our group, as we would normally do when we got to a spot. We would read the text from Scripture associated with it, or one of the texts. And you can see it's a decent-sized fall. Not a plummet, but if you got thrown off onto those rocks, you would bounce a few times and it wouldn't go well. But the text after that says, or at the end there, 30 says, Jesus just walked right by. I don't know how that miracle happened, whether he literally walked or he just walked and they were like, ugh, and he just couldn't stand his authority or whatever. Looking from the precipice back across, you get a better view of the agriculture happening in the valley of Jezreel toward Megiddo. And there is the valley of Jezreel from Nazareth. And I thought that flower was a good foreground. I was trying to be an artist with that particular picture. Work with me a little bit, people. So you can see Jesus' hometown right next to this huge valley, but on the backside, a little bit removed from that ebb and flow. Questions? We're going to get one more section done and be close to where I was hoping to be. All right. And there's some cool things in this last place we visited, Caesarea Maritima. I didn't take this picture either, because this was taken even further up in the air. But I thought it would be great because we're going to look at all of these things. Start with the amphitheater, then we're going to go to Herod's palace, the hippodrome, Paul's jail cell, and then we'll end with the aqueduct. But you can see this was a significant town. All right? It became a major center of government and an intellectual hub until the Muslim conquest, when it was destroyed by Herod the Great. Now, that's the one that slaughtered the innocents at Bethlehem. None of the Herods were good. They were all pretty villainous. But Herod the Great built this. He's also the one that rebuilt the temple. The temple that Jesus walked around in was thanks to his work and his high taxes. Philip brought Christianity here to Caesarea. Maritima means on the water, because there's a number of Caesareas. Everyone wanted to name their town after Caesar. You win brownie points. Just like that's why there's like 12 Alexandrias over there as well in the east. Acts chapter 8, when they came up out of the water, the Spirit of the Lord suddenly took Philip away. That's after the Ethiopian eunuch. And the eunuch didn't see him again, but went on his way rejoicing. Philip, however, appeared at Azotus and traveled about, preaching the gospel in all the towns until he reached Caesarea. And this is the one that he came to. Paul was imprisoned in this town, this seaside town, for 2 years. So he spent 2 years here. The portions of the site that were preserved were buried by the sand. The sand preserved this. That's why it's so well preserved. At the end of the Crusades in 1265, the Crusaders had used this as one of their ports. It was basically deserted. The sands of time swept over it again, and until modern excavations started uncovering it again, it was saved. And so you see what happens. What do we find here? Christian art. On the left, a shepherd carrying a sheep. That's not the kind of thing. That's what's left of it. You're saying to yourself, what happened to his face? What happened to his face? What happened to all their faces? Who doesn't depict an image? Muslims. They get rid of the faces. Because of the, again, you don't depict Muhammad. All Muslim art is basically geometric and whatnot. You don't do this kind of thing. And so they took the faces off of them. But that was Christian art. You also see somebody had a large foot. I don't know who that was, the foot belonged to, but that's a good sized foot. Size, I don't know, 34, 35. And then the bottom right one is in that Greek Roman style, so that would have been older. The amphitheater. This is Herod's theater. It, of course, been modernized, and they use this. This would be an awesome place to go to a concert. You know, the Mediterranean Sea right behind you as well. You can see that the seats, they don't look like the most comfortable seats. They're just stone to sit on. The one on the left is actually original. That's what's left of one of the original seats. So again, it's been beaten up a little bit by time, but a significant amphitheater, very Roman. You see the decorative elements, and they have these on pedestals so that you can take a better look at them from that highly ornate amphitheater, and all of the art and work that went into it. And then this one. This one's later, because the symbolism, of course, is Christian. So this is from the Byzantine period or even later, and they would have added that. This sent me down a rabbit trail this week, trying to figure out who Procopius the deacon was. And if it's known who Procopius the deacon was, I couldn't find it on the internet. But I did find a fascinating story about someone else named Procopius, who was here in Caesarea Maritima. So maybe it was him. And I'll tell you about that guy here in a minute. But this sarcophagus reads the grave of Procopius the deacon. They put the bodies in here until all the flesh had melted away, and then they would take the bones and put them in the family ossuary, in the bone box. That's the way they would do it. It's a dry climate. You can do this sort of thing. And before I get to that, we reuse stone in the ancient world. When a column is broken, you don't just throw it away, you reuse it. And so the one on the right, they turned the base of an ancient column into a board game. I don't know what the rules were. I don't know what you put in the holes, right? Stones for keeping score? I have no, was this like, Go? Is it like Chinese checkers? I don't know how you play. Cribbage? Yeah, what are we playing here? I don't know. But somebody took the time to, again, I love board games, but this one doesn't feel portable because that looks like it's heavy. Here's two more. Someone hollowed out one of them to use it as the cover of their well. And someone hollowed out a column to turn it into a basin, water trough for their horse or some such thing. We reuse things in the ancient world because a lot of work goes into carving things out of stone. And of course, they're not a disposable culture like we are. These are the remains of Herod's palace. Herod, for all of his bad qualities, and there were many, was a man who knew his architecture and had expensive taste. How do we know that? This was his seaside swimming pool. On the shore of the Mediterranean Sea, Herod had a private swimming pool with his nice tile floor. So yeah, the man didn't scrimp on his own palace, certainly. A building stone that reads, Pontius Pilate, the prefect of Judea, erected a building dedicated to the emperor Tiberius. Sometimes people in archaeology are looking for confirmation of things in the Bible, right? Jews are looking for confirmation of things from the Old Testament, Christians looking for things from the New Testament. This is a piece of archaeology that confirms, and we have other evidence as well, that Pontius Pilate was governor of Judea, or prefect, because he paid for whatever building this used to be a part of here in Caesarea Maritima, and they put his name on the wall. This is what's left of the hippodrome. The sea has come in since then and eroded a lot closer to it. It was once 50 meters wide and 400 meters long and had 13,000 seats for the chariot races. The ancient world's version of NASCAR. I don't know if they were always turning left, but also people came to see the crashes, just like they do today. You've seen Ben-Hur. Ben-Hur is very close to the kind of thing that it was. This was a huge deal, and again, Herod is getting prestige for himself and his family by building this city and naming it after Caesar and all of that. One more look, there you can see that after, in later years, the part that used to be the hippodrome was transformed a little bit. This is new excavation work. On the underground jail, which used to be a cistern, where they believe Paul, the apostle, was housed. Acts 24, when 2 years had passed, Felix was succeeded by Porcius Festus, but because Felix wanted to grant a favor to the Jews, he left Paul in prison. That's what it looked like when we were there, and you're saying, I can't see anything. So I borrowed a picture from a month earlier when the tarp wasn't there. And you can see an underground structure extending over by Herod's palace that they are now excavating. And over time, that will be opened up, and there will be tours going down there and stories of Paul and one thing. One of the things that the Israeli authorities allow, and actually probably appreciate, are putting up signs with Christian references about Jesus, about the apostles. They don't have an issue with that. So you go over there, and each one of these sites has a sign that quotes the New Testament. That doesn't bother them at all. The man on the left is... that's an icon of Procopius. The C and the K, don't let that throw you. The one because the Kappa is Greek. They don't have the C, they're just the K. But an inscription was found in this jail, written that says, Lord Jesus help Procopius. So someone kept in this jail cell was crying out to the Lord for help for Procopius. You're saying, and I said to myself, I need to know this story. Who on earth is Procopius? All right? So I found what I believe to be who she was writing about. It says, and this was written by a pilgrim around 560, from there I traveled to Caesarea Philippi, which also has names Stratus's Tower and Caesarea Palestine. the resting place of St. Pamphilius, St. Procopius, and St. Cornelius, from whose bed we took a blessing. So Procopius was associated with Caesarea. Procopius, according to Orthodox hagiography, and hagiography is the life of the saints. Beginning in about the 3rd century, it was a very popular way of writing, and so they would write the lives of the saints. And in these hagiographies, you have hard truth mixed with fanciful stuff that doesn't seem like, that's certainly not historical. So it's hard to really dig in and find out what really happened. But according to that life of the saint, Procopius suffered martyrdom under the great persecution of Emperor Diocletian, 284 to 305. It only lasted about 2 years, but more than half of the martyrs of the early church died in that one period. When after his own Damascus Road experience, Procopius refused to worship the pagan gods, angering the emperor whom he'd previously served as a general. That much is true. We know that this Procopius, we have evidence of him. The hagiography has a long, involved story about how he miraculously survived some horrific, gruesome tortures until they finally, I believe it was stabbed him in the chest or whatever. But I mean, you read it and you're like, it's quite gruesome. But evidently, a woman who was in that jail cell was worried about Procopius, if it's the same guy. Again, there could have been two guys in two different generations with the same name, but a man who hailed from this area was martyred about that time. And so it's just fascinating to see that evidence of that was found underground here. And then lastly, we'll look at the aqueduct. Roman aqueducts, right? Super famous Roman aqueducts. The Roman era aqueduct brought water from the springs at the base of Mount Carmel. It's 5 kilometers long, which is 3 miles, and 1.5 meters wide. And so this I like. You see the channel, the water channel. See the two sides? That's where the water would have run. It would have had a covering, a wooden top, to keep the water from getting, fouled or whatever, birds swimming around in your drinking water and whatnot. It supplied this town with water for 1,200 years. When the Romans built something, they built to last. And on the left, you see a parallel aqueduct that was built in AD 130 because the town had grown and they couldn't, that one thing of water wasn't enough. So they built an entire parallel track right next to it. And so they had 2 separate ones flowing from Mount Carmel. And the thing is, if you're going 3 miles from the source of the springs, what do you have to calculate to make an aqueduct work? The slope. How much can it fall over 3 miles so that the water moves? If we start too early, we're going to be underground by the time we get to Caesarea, right? So they could do their geometry. They did the math. They figured out that it's going to go down a foot over 3 miles, and that's enough to keep the water flowing. And it's fascinating how they did that. As someone who enjoyed geometry in high school, I know most people hated it. That's just some serious math. Here's a closer look at the aqueduct and, of course, the arch, Roman arches. This thing has been standing there for 2,000 years, and it's still there. And with a little bit of repair work, it could still carry water, right? A little bit of... And there you can see the Mediterranean Sea in the background. And then I wanted to focus in on the Roman arch, because the arch is something the Romans perfected that is huge in their architecture, in the Colosseum, in the aqueducts, in their bridges. Right, Roman bridges, some of them still stand because of how strong an arch is, how naturally supporting it is. And this one, I think the salt water has been eaten away at these pretty good, but hey, 2,000 years of salt water and it's still standing, right? I mean, that's pretty impressive. So we will end there because we are out of time with the Roman aqueduct at Caesarea Maritima. And next week we will continue on and eventually get to Jerusalem and then finish up with Jerusalem and then the Dead Sea on the last week. Questions on our way to closing up? I know we're a minute or two over, but if you don't mind, I'll answer questions if you got them. So that's the north. We've been in the north the whole time, right? Nowhere near the south just yet. So we were there in May, and it was warm. I would not tour Israel in July or August. But I also wouldn't go to Texas in July or August, or Florida, or Mexico, right? Because it's hot. It was plenty hot in May. Not too bad, but warm. Their winters are cool and rainy, because that's when the rain comes, which we all know about. And their summers are hot and dry, as you would expect, because what else can they be when it's that close to the equator? So, all right, so I appreciate you coming. We'll pick it up there next time and move on. Yep.